Hi, everybody, and welcome. Welcome to this week's Writers Chat. This is a place where we like to gather together as writers. We talk about writing, all things writers, for writers, and by writers. And so we're so glad to see everybody here today. And if for those of you that are watching the replay, that you take the time to feed your writer's journey and watch us and share. This is such a good supportive community, and we're glad to be together. So this week we're going to turn it over to Brandy. She's going to lead us in a discussion. We'll let her tell us about what we're going to do. So take it away, Brandy.
Hi, everyone. This week we are talking about style sheets and story Bibles. I don't know how many of you are familiar with either of them. Perhaps some of you have maybe started work on a story Bible and didn't realize it, but I'm going to talk about what they are, the differences between them, and how you can use them so that you can make your writing more productive and help to make your editors happy. So, what is a style sheet? It is an editorial document that is used to track decisions that you make in your writing, in the mechanical aspects in particular. So if you use a plural word that like octopuses or octopi, you would want to log something like that on your style sheet so that you remember the choices that you are making as you're writing. Now, a story Bible is a little bit different. It is a tool as well. It is basically a writer's handbook to the story that you are creating, and it's used to track your creative elements and the decisions that you make about your story world and your characters. It's a little bit different than an outline. An outline tracks the plot and more of the timeline of what everybody does. The story Bible is the deeper elements, and you will probably put a lot more in your story Bible to share about the world and your characters than you would ever put in your actual story. But you need those details in order to be able to flesh out your stories. So we are going to look at first the story Bible a little bit more in depth. One thing that you want to do is figure out how do you best work, because you can make a story Bible with hard copy, with paper. You can use index cards if you really want to. You could convert a planner. You could use a 3-ring binder, a disc planner. I was just going to grab one, but I realized I pushed it out of the way a little bit. Oh, here, it's on this side. Disc binder, for those of you who are not familiar with what discs are, it's like this, and the pages are pretty removable really easily. But it's like a 3-ring binder. And then you can use file folders if you want to. But basically the idea is you file like material together. And I'll go over that. I'm going to share my screen in a little bit. But you can also use digital. You can use Word or Pages documents and just create a bunch of them, and you can file them in your computer under different folders in your computer. You could use something like Scrivener that has the capability of having folders and files in one place altogether. It's really like a digital cabinet, filing cabinet. You could also use something like Word Anvil. And I will put a link for Word Anvil in the chat. That is a unique online tool that not only gives you the ability to create a story Bible for your world and your characters, but it also allows you to share it with others. You could even actually monetize if you wanted to. The benefits are that it guides you through a lot of the things you can do. It has many, many different elements that you can use to help create your story Bible. There's a free version, there's a paid version. I've used the free version a little bit, but I haven't done much with it. The drawbacks for that is that, it's all online. And me personally, I like to have more control over my content. So I put things on my computer. I don't like it to be out there on somebody else's server. That's just my personal preference. But everybody has a way that they work, that they prefer to work. So figure out what works best for you in creating your story Bible. Is it hard copy? Is it digital? I tend to do a little bit of both. I work with Scrivener. I make a bunch of different files. I categorize them so that I can use the online search features or the digital search features that my program provides if I'm looking for something, and I can find a little bit more easier. But then I also print out those things and I stick them in a disc planner because I am very visually oriented. And if it's on my computer, filed away, and I'm away from my computer, I don't see it. So I'm really an out of sight, out of mind kind of person. So I need to have things right in front of me and be able to access it and flip through it. And I also really like the manual writing. There's just something about manually writing things that helps my creativity. If I don't manually write, I actually have a hard time with the initial creation. Once something is already done, I work great on the computer. I can edit fantastically, but that initial creation for me, I really need to handwrite things and have that pen on paper, that tactile feel of the motion. It's just something about that that helps my brain to work. So that's what I use when I need. So I am going to share a story Bible template. It basically is just a big list of categories and topics, and we'll go through that together, and I'll show them to you. And these are things that I have curated from several different places, and then some topics I've come up with on my own. But you'll see from looking at this that this is by far not exhaustive. You could add to this probably exponentially. For as much as you can create in your story world, you can add things and things and things. So the one biggest thing that you need to know about a story Bible, or sometimes people use a character Bible or a series Bible if you're creating longer works or series of works, is that these things are meant to be customizable, moldable to what you need. If there are things in a template that you find online that don't fit your story, delete them. If there are things that are missing, you add them. That's what's really cool about story Bibles. It's whatever you need to keep your stories in plan. Now, before I get into story Bible, I need to say something quickly before I forget, because I'm really good sometimes at forgetting. Style sheets can be used for fiction as well as nonfiction. They're used very largely by freelance editors and editors in-house to track the changes that are made and are going to stand with your story as it moves forward in the publishing process. But they're very valuable for writers to implement as well, because it helps you to keep things in lines in an early stage. And you can share those things later on with any freelance editor that you hire. And even if you don't share it, when you send your work out, it will be pretty clear to any editor that works on a manuscript that you have been consistent with your writing and the choices that you've made, whether you have chosen to use a serial comma or not a serial comma. That will be clear. And you don't always need that, to make that kind of decision. You don't need a style sheet to do that, but it will be clear. It helps to keep everything organized. And organization is always a writer's best friend. Confusion is like the worst enemy when it comes to a writer, because you don't know where you're going, what you're doing. So that's why I love style sheets. So they're useful for nonfiction and fiction writers. And in fact, editors will use these style sheets on just about everything that comes by them, because they need to track those changes. The story Bibles are more predominantly for fiction writers. There are outlines, just like for fiction, outlines for nonfiction, and you might go through an outline in that way. And you might develop some of your own things, but you can really use a style sheet to help with the nonfiction writing process as well. So story Bible. Let me share my screen, and let's see, I'm going to share my desktop, which means you're going to all probably see yourselves for a minute. So please let me know what you see. Oh, you don't see yourself. What do you see this a lady on my screen?
Yes.
Okay, good. All right, so do you now see the document that I just moved on my screen?
Yes.
Beautiful. I love it when things work the way they are supposed to. So I was at the bottom of my thing. So you can see it's kind of long. And this list is covering a lot of material. So story Bible template. One of the first things I put on here was characters, because stories are made up of characters, what they want, the things that they can't have, that they're trying to get, the obstacles in their way. So I like to put my characters first, because even if you develop a story Bible, you really need to focus on your characters first when you're creating a story. And if you don't have a story, and you don't have something that they want, and you don't have something that's getting in the way of what they want, you really don't have a story. You just have a world and a setting. It might be really cool, but you still have to make something put in it. So I like to put the characters first. And you can see that there are names. We've logged their names. Here's where you can put character sketches, and that you can go into great detail, or you can do it, kind of scantily and just find things out as you go along. Character relationships, backgrounds that they have, where they come from. Something I didn't put in there is their ethnicity, all of that, but that would come under character sketches. Their personal timelines and any special days that they might have. And of course, there are other things that you can put under this character log. Anything that fits directly with your specific characters in your world, you can put under this section of your story Bible. Then I have next specific locations and settings. These are a little bit different than the general world. The general world is down a little bit farther, but these are really specific. So any particular stores that your characters might go into, churches, hospitals, homes, landmarks, historical sites. What are the dangerous places that are in the area that your characters might travel to? What are remote areas? Luxury places and common locations. Privileged locations where only certain people can access. So you kind of think about these kinds of things. And actually the really cool thing that I really like about the Story Bible is that as you go through and you look at some of these things and you try and fill out some of the stuff, it can actually help to generate more of your story. And I find that the absolute coolest thing about Story Bibles. Next, I have the category world or worlds, because if you're writing something like science fiction and fantasy, most likely you have more than one world. You may or may not, but it's very possible. That's the most likely thing that you're going to do. And then geography. So beginning is natural world. The astral elements, like the color of the sky, the sun, the moon, and the stars. Is there only one sun? Is there more than one sun? Is there multiple moons? The structure of time and seasons. This is important if you're writing science fiction and fantasy, because not everything follows the natural timeline that we know in our current day. The atmosphere of your story or the world, the climate, the lands. What kind of waters are there? Are there lots of big water? Is there predominantly water? Are there just small water? Or is water hard to get? Any kind of natural formations, particularly ones that are important in your story world. And then natural resources, the kinds of materials that are valuable in your world or useful. Next is geography. You want to give a brief overview of the towns and the cities. You definitely want to add in their names, because if you write in their names and then you can't remember exactly what you wrote or maybe how you spelled it, here's where you would go back to reference it to make sure you're keeping consistency within your work. Same with states and provinces and countries. And then here's a good place to put any maps you might develop for your world. Now, again, if you're writing science fiction and fantasy, you're most likely apt to use this section on planets and solar systems. You would want to put in names, the kinds of populations that are on the planets, the relationships of planets to each other or solar systems to each other. Also, their interplanetary status. What is the status of Earth compared to the status of Malacandra or something? And for those of you not familiar with Malacandra, that is what C.S. Lewis calls Mars in his Out of the Silent Planet book, I think it is, in the Space Trilogy. Then next is weather. What are the types of weather? Is it always rainy, lots of rain? Is the sun shiny? Weather patterns. Are there cycles? Is there a different kind of weather pattern than what's different? And again, if you are working with common era today, what people are familiar with, you don't really need to put in these things. So you can just kind of go over it, unless there's something a little bit out of the ordinary. Then you would want to log it on your story Bible, just to remind yourself, this is a little bit different than what people are going to expect. Any dangerous weather and its frequency, home and body provisions for the weather. Do people have coats for cold weather? Do they have different kinds of attire for when it's really, really hot? What about their homes? Are they insulated well, or do they have insufficient homes for the kind of environment that they're living in? Vegetation, what's common, what's rare? Right? Is there dangerous vegetation? Some that are used for medicinal purposes. What about things that are parasitic? That's interesting. I just watched an episode of Star Trek Discovery where they have parasitic ice, and at night it creeps over and overtakes anything that's on it. Kind of cool. It's not exactly vegetation, but it acts like vegetation. What about any vegetation that is protective? That's a different element. Animals. Any signification is not a word, by the way. Yeah, I just got to change it because editor me says that's wrong. So significant common species in animals, rare and endangered species in animals, and then ones that are unique to your story world. Maybe you made an animal that doesn't exist. Put that in here. Give details about it. Tell what it looks like, what it eats, what is its prey. Maybe it is a prey to something else. Put all of those details in your animals. So the next is people, species, and sentient beings. People and sentient beings, you have genders. Maybe there's no genders. Maybe there's something really different nobody's ever thought of. Significant identifiers to people, unusual characteristics or biology, their method of procreation or reproduction. Maybe there are robots. Maybe they actually reproduce. Do they do it by mechanically putting themselves together, or is there something that somebody hasn't thought of before that you're thinking of that you want to do? Put that in there. Emotional capabilities of your people and beings, or their deficits in that. Bodily composition, are they biological? Are they non-biological? Next are races and species. You want to list majorities, minorities, ethnicities, any other groups, subgroups, classes, or castes, relationships and dynamics between all of these groups. And then it's a good idea to think about what are the commonalities between them, and then what are the differences or any disconnects. Is there something that one group really, there's something unique about one group that the other group totally cannot understand, maybe they even judge them for it. What about settlements that these races and species have? So the next largest section is social organization and conflicts. You want to think about government and rulers. What type of government does your story world have? What system? What are the dominant powers, subservient peoples, enemies? The relationships between the governing powers in your world. What about foreign relations and diplomacy, or interstellar foreign relations? There's always interstellar foreign relations if you have a sci-fi fantasy and you have worlds at odds with one another. Military, what are the military structures? Do they even have a military? The branches of the military, what are their technologies and their weaponry? How do they fight? I didn't put that in there, but how do they fight? Soldier types and their numbers. How do they recruit or draft? What are their practices for that? The status among the common people of the military. How do the common people view the military, and vice versa? How does the military view the common people? How people treat the military personnel, you know, from the way Vietnam vets were treated following their return home. It wasn't very great. Is that an aspect in your story world? Put that in there. Wars and conflicts. What about the history of wars and conflicts? What is the current status on them? Any potential wars or conflicts? And then parties involved. And then outcomes. Causes, as in like you're taking up a cause, Greenpeace, save the world, save the whales, right? That's a cause. What are dominant causes in your world? Or subordinate causes? There are causes that are out there, but they have limits and they hit walls because they're minor compared to other things, or they're oppressed. Importance in the relationship to other causes. The legal system, is there one? What is there for crime? What about their conviction and their system for that, and the procedure for conviction? Do they have a court of law? Do they have a jury? Is there something completely different? Maybe they're just, you're in jail and that's it, you're done. What kinds of punishments are there? Facilities for convicted persons and their law enforcement structure overall. Do they have a police force? Is there some other kind of enforcement? Is there some kind of priest who actually is the enforcement? The next big section is history. There aren't any subcategories under that, although any of these or other ones could be subcategories. I listed major world events, cataclysmic events, natural disasters, any significant turning points, technological advances, culture wars, shifts or changes, major wars, key focal point in a nation that is related to there. Sometimes there are key things that happen in a nation or in a world, and everything stems from it. So what are those things? And then planetary history. Next big section is socioeconomic, the economy. What is the economy type? The monetary structure, their banking system, their investment system, trades and barters, and how common is it? Wealth distribution, the lifestyle of the poor and the rich. And then what is taboo or forbidden practices in earning money? Business structures in relationship to the government, the cost to do business, dominant companies and monopolies, free enterprise or control, government involvement in business. Maybe they're not involved. Maybe everybody does it on a small scale. Maybe it's just strictly a trade or barter system. Professions, what are the kinds of work people can do? What's common, what's rare? How about the distribution of work? Is there too many workers for a certain field and not enough of others? What about the ease of securing a job? The average length of time someone's employed in certain jobs. Maybe they have lifelong jobs they're assigned. Maybe they are raised for certain positions and they never leave those. The unemployment rate, the ability to live on a common income, restrictions of the genders and the species or ethnicities on jobs. Maybe there's restrictions and some can't do what they want to do. That could be in a story in itself. What are taboo jobs? What are coveted jobs or hated jobs? And the most and the least respected jobs. These are all these kinds of things to think about. Definitely good story fodder. Materials and infrastructure. Scientific technology. What are the natural and the supernatural laws? This is especially important to think about if you are doing science fiction and fantasy. The advancement of technology or the lack thereof. Technology's role in everyday life. We have cell phones. What does your story world have? Relationship of people and species to the technology. Is it something separate from them or is it integrated into their bodies? The dependence on tech and integration. What are the costs of it? Or is it absorbed into it or is it too high? Are some people with technology or some people without technology? The science advancement and the importance of the science in society. Travel. Think about modes of travel. Land, water, air, space travel. What kinds of vehicles or vessels do they have? Interplanetary travel, how does that function? What are the restrictions on travel? How about dangerous travel or immigration and emigration? What about travel time? Can you step in a transporter beam and go immediately somewhere? And isn't it interesting to think about that transporter beam? If I say that, everybody pretty much understands what that is, even though it's not a thing. It's kind of become a sci-fi trope that others use it quite successfully. Is there a different kind of transportation other than a transporter? Common and rare types of travel, and then the cost of travel. Architecture and infrastructure, thinking about homes and building structures, the materials, the costs, the appearances. What do the streets and the walkways look like? What about sanitary provisions, water and garbage, right? You think maybe often don't think about those things, but if you're creating like a different story world, science fiction, fantasy in particular, those might come up in your story. They might not. If not, don't put it on. It's not a big deal. City streets and maps. Another place, good place to put maps if you want like a local version versus like a bigger what your world looks like. You can put like a street view of a map. Burial sites, sometimes that can be important. I'm working on a story that works around things like that, so I have to think about those things. Communication and utilities, their devices and the advancements or lack of it. How people stay warm or how they run their machines and appliances. So do they stay warm with gas? Do they have some kind of thermal energy? Do they use electricity? Energy supplies, their cost of energy, and their ease of communication. Items. Here you can put any special items, anything that you can't think of that doesn't fit under another category, but certain things that go there, like maybe you have like the Ark of the Covenant that you're working on, stick it in there. Materials, common materials, raw materials, maybe materials that are extinct you can't get anymore, or that once blew up somewhere and you need it for your spaceship and you can't get it anywhere. How are the materials obtained? Mining, drilling, fracking, maybe extraction, or maybe they produce in a lab. Now, if you're running science fiction and fantasy, a magic system might come into play. A lot of Christians don't like to deal with magic. Some don't think much of it, and they make magic an integral part of their world. So it's not really like magic as in like spells, but it's just kind of a different kind of way that their world functions, and it's the natural law of their story world. So you think about, what are the rules of the magic systems or the otherworldly rules that govern the universe? The leaders of it, teachers of it, technology that is used with the magic system, any rituals or the consequences of breaking the rules, the rewards of excelling, dangers and pitfalls, or weaknesses. All different kinds of things you can put in there if that's the kind of story that you write. Public life. This is kind of bigger. This is getting to more close to what your characters will use. So public locations, landmarks, historical sites, dangerous places, remote areas, luxury places, calm locations, privileged locations. Family. What are the constitution of a family? Do they look like a normal family that we know today? If not, put it in here, because if it looks different, you're going to want to highlight that in your story. What is the life cycle of a family? What are the family dynamics? Immediate and extended family. The expectation of family members, maybe there are some. What about member roles? If they're any bit different, or if they're unique to your particular character, write those down somewhere in your story Bible. Religion, types of religion, belief, places of worship, holy artifacts, the tenets, expectations, the practices, grounds for excommunication. How about changing religions or sacrifices? A lot of different things that you could put in there. Culture, holidays, myths and legends, public rituals, artifacts and important documents in your society. What about morality and moral systems, burial customs, languages? A lot of the things actually you could put under languages, you could make that its own category. Any special terms and proper usage. Education, how are you people educated? The method, the goals for students. I'm not going to go through every single thing. We're almost at the end of this list, believe it or not. It's a little bit big. There's a couple more pages, but I'm going to kind of skim a little bit more so that we can move on to give you an idea. And I will actually post this story Bible template in Writers Chat members on Facebook so that you can look at this and use this as a launching point for your own story Bible. Medicine, the kinds of illnesses, diseases, accidents, how things are treated, the major health threats in the past, maybe looming health threats. How about elderly care or child care? That would fall under medicine a little bit as well, if there's like pediatric medicine. Child care could actually be put in a different category as well. Daily life, the clothing, that's a big thing. What do people wear? Hopefully they wear clothes. Maybe they don't need clothes. The fashion, what kinds of fabrics are used? Low, middle, or high class attire? Do they wear head or body coverings? What about footwear? Protective gear? And then differences between the genders and species, or the regions, or the culture groups. Food. Food's a big one. Any of you foodies out there, you probably have fun with this section. What are the staples? What's gourmet? What's rare? What's common? What about something that's poison if it's not prepared properly? What about availability? How do they get their food? All kinds of different really cool things you could put in here. Preparations, cooking methods, a lot of fun you could have here. Recreation and entertainment. What do your people do when they want to relax or just enjoy themselves? Where do they go? What do they like? What do they hate? You might have certain groups and ethnicities that love one thing and hate another, while another one is the opposite of that group. The arts and music. This is sometimes something that is overlooked a lot, I think. And actually, as I was going through this list, I almost forgot about it. And then I came across something on a website. I'm like, oh, how could I forget art and music? I mean, this is what we do. We do art, right? When we create our stories and we do all of this creative self-expression. It's some even said that people live longer and feel better when they participate in the creative arts and music. So definitely put in a category. Think about what do people do in the arts and music? How does that integrate into their lives? I mean, think about our emotions. When we are feeling a certain way, sometimes we'll put on music that will match that. Or if we're trying to fight maybe a depression or a down feeling, we might put in praise music or something that's uplifting to help shift our emotions. So music is really, really important. And I would really encourage you to think about how it plays in with your characters and can it be used in a way to help your characters. It doesn't fit into every story, but it could fit into yours. Also dance, that kind of thing, or brain cramp, play acting, that's what I was thinking of. You know, maybe your characters have to act as spies, so they have to dress up and pretend to be somebody else. That's a really interesting way to get the arts in there in a creative manner that is functional for your story. What about behavior? Manners, gestures, and posturing, how people move, ethics and morals. You know, with gestures and posturing, that could be species specific. So you could have a certain type of species that drags a limb all the time because of the way they're constructed. Different really neat things that you can put in there. What are the costumes, private rituals that people have, prayers that is common for a group, forbidden behavior and actions, practices of forgiveness and practices of retribution or revenge, a lot of different things. So at the bottom of this, I have the World Anvil, and I'm going to put this one in the chat too. This is the Science Fiction and Fantasy Writers of America. They have a fantasy world building question, huge thing on their website, but it is also useful for people that are not writing science fiction and fantasy. So now I'm going to shift over. I'm going to move this off my screen. I'm going to shift to the style sheet. This is what you would use when you have something written. Your story Bible is what you use when you're writing. So once you have something written or you're writing it, as you're writing it, you could do a little bit of both. You would fill out a style sheet. I like to put the author and the title here. I have editor and date because I do some freelance editing. You can skip those parts. But there's different things here. Abbreviations and acronyms. These are the kinds of things that you would put on, like if you have USA, do you have periods in between the letters or do you have it all together without the periods? So you would type in here, US, and then you write without periods. Artwork, is there any specific artwork you have here? The name of an artwork. Bibliography. Under bibliography, you would put not necessarily the bibliography, but an example of the format of your bibliography, how your bibliography should look. And so whenever you need to create a reference in your bibliography, you will be able to go back to your style sheet and say, okay, this is the format that I'm putting it in. And it will be a lot easier on you. Characters, I put in a list of all the characters I have, names, their kinds of relationships. If I'm editing somebody's story, I want to remember which characters, which I put their names in, because if you have the name Catherine, do you spell it with a C or do you spell it with a K? Do you spell it with the E-R-I-N or do you omit that first E? So put in their characters' names and the spelling. You can even put in parentheses after that, son of so-and-so, daughter of so-and-so, so that you have their relationships down as well. I like to do that as an editor because not being in a story anywhere to me as much as an author, I'm not going to remember those kinds of relationships as easily as if I put it onto a style sheet. Something about writing it down helps me remember as well. And then if I forget, I can go back and look here. Dates and numbers. You can put specific dates, but this is also a format. Today is November 30th, but there's also a format that's written like this. And so if you choose that kind of format, then you would put that in there as an example of the way that your dates in your manuscript are to be formatted. If you choose the other way, November 30th, comma, 2001, then you put that in. Isabel comments it's French date format. I believe they also use that, I think they use that over in UK, but it's also common in AP style handbook, like newspapers, because less commas. You'll see that a lot of the time in journalistic style of writing. Family lines. I included family lines because a little hint, when I was, not hint, but tip, when I was editing for Melissa, my co-host, many years ago, she had family lines, and I had to keep track of which family line was which. So I actually stuck this in here. So okay, we have these people are in this family line, and these people are in this family line. That really helped me to remember what's what. Footnotes, similar thing to bibliography, the style, the format of your footnotes that you're going to use. Holidays, any special holidays, any specific format for the way that it is written, capitalizations, for example, or not. Miscellaneous notes, this would be a place to put in, let's see, something like any down style capitalizations for certain things, or anything else that doesn't fit in these other categories. Permissions or credits needed. If you are quoting a song, you're going to need to get permission from the copyright holder to quote it. So you want to put a note here, the song title, and where to get permission from. People groups, similar kinds of things as family lines, just a little bit different. So if you have certain groups of people, you can put them in. Person, point of view, are you writing first person, past tense, that kind of thing. Places, geographical locations. This can take some of the information that is off your story Bible, and you'll find that some of the information between the style sheet, the story Bible, and an outline may cross over, and that's totally fine. Just put it wherever you need it. Oops, I have something falling off my monitor. Okay, punctuation. Are you using a serial comma or not? Put that in there. Any other types of specific punctuation notes that you might need for your document. Special symbols, tables, figures, and captions. If you have them, nonfiction often will have them. You would want to write them here. Typographic elements. You probably won't work with typographic elements quite so much, so you probably don't need that. And if you don't need it, you could delete it. Anything that is not categorized. Types of vehicles. If you have a character that's in a Maserati that's yellow, put it down on your sheet so you remember it's a Maserati and it's yellow. The next list is letters, a whole bunch of letters. And these are used for something like, I'm going to think of, let's see, the word antenna. If you were to make it plural, you could choose antennae or antennas. So you make a decision which you're going to use in your manuscript, and then you would put it here. Antennas, antennas. Can I even spell it right? Oh goodness, forgive my terrible spelling. This is why if I don't know how to spell something, I know where to go and look at dictionary. You'll find that editors don't necessarily know everything in their head, but they know that when they don't know it, they know where to go to look. And obviously I cannot spell antenna. I'm missing a first A. Ha, 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 ha. There we go. That's much better. Antennas, not antenna. Godly, I am terrible with typing today. Oh, and another thing that you might put here is PL for plural. Well, oftentimes when you're writing an entry here, and you'll have a specific word, it might be a noun or it might be an adjective. So you put in little parentheses an N for noun or an A for an adjective, PL for plurals, just to identify what type of grammar it is that you're making this specific entry for. And so this goes all the way down to here. And many of these you may have absolutely nothing that you put in, and that's fine. So now I'm going to grab my last sheet here. I'm going to take a look at the types of things that you put on your style sheet. Example 1. While you may correct several errors during editing, not everything should be logged on a style sheet. None of the corrections needed here require logging. You'll see some errors right here. That should be several. Oh, and I read B, not everything should be logged on the style sheet, but I actually didn't write it. So that would need to be added. And then none of the corrections, no apostrophe needed here required for logging. So you might make a correction in your sheet when you're going through your editing, but these kinds of things are not what you put on a style sheet. They're just normal things that you would need to correct. Now down here in example 2 is a little different. Follow the Chicago Manual of Style, CMOS, when editing your manuscripts intended for books and magazines, and the Associated Press Style Book, AP, for newspaper submissions. But you don't need to give yourself gray hair in handling these mammoth guides to do so. Proofreading Secrets of Best-Selling Authors by Kathy Ide will give you guidance on both, in addition to the Christian Writer's Manual of Style, CWMS, so you can ready a polished manuscript to impress editors with your technical professionalism. The things from here that need absolutely no editorial corrections should be logged on your style sheet. That would be the Chicago Manual of Style, CMOS, especially because it has this abbreviation. The Associated Press Style Book, AP, for the same reason. Proofreading Secrets of Best-Selling Authors, and you could include by Kathy Ide, and then the Christian Writer's Guide to Manual of Style. But there's also one more thing you're going to want to include on here, and that is the word gray, because gray can also be spelled G-R-E-Y. I personally like G-R-E-Y. I tend to use that, but I put G-R-A-Y here because that's the more American version, and G-R-E-Y is the more common in British writing. But regardless, you would want to take gray and put it under G on your style sheet with a parenthesis that says not G-R-E-Y. So that would help anybody that's working on your manuscript beside you. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen for a minute. There we are. Stop sharing. Okay, oh, there it is. Little red button. There we go. So to conclude, how do these things reduce confusion? So they both save you from stress because they allow you to quickly find the data that you need and remind you of the decisions that you already made. And that helps you to maintain writer peace and consistency in your work. How do they increase productivity? Well, it may take a while to put these things in, but it saves time when you need to look for an element that you wrote. Sure, you could search for it in your manuscript. If you got it on your computer, you can just search, but maybe you don't remember the exact spelling. Maybe you just remember the general idea, but you probably have a good idea of the category in which you're looking for. So you can go back to your store Bible, you can go back to your style sheet, and you can look at your entries and find what you're looking for much easier. So that helps you to save time from backtracking a whole bunch through a giant bunch of text that you've written. And it helps you to fix the inconsistencies in a faster manner and with more security, because you will know what you had already put down because you logged it. How do these things make editors happy? Well, if you happen to hire a freelance editor, they're going to want to make a style sheet. They need to make a style sheet. They should make a style sheet. And if they return your work, it should come back with a style sheet to show the changes and the decisions that they made in your manuscript. So if you have a style sheet and you send that with your work to them, it will help to save you time and money, because they'll be able to look at that and be able to know these are your preferences. Now, they may still need to change some things because they're going to be more equipped to understand the Chicago Manual style or the AP style. That's what your manuscript needs, because they're more used to working with it than you are, and so they will know the more proper decisions to make if there's something that comes up that maybe you didn't know about, and that's fine. But your style sheet will guide them, and it will give them something to start from. If you're working fiction and you have a big cast of characters and you send them part of your character list and your places, your locations and things like that, it's going to help reduce time, because they're not going to have to log as much. It's just going to be a look, see that it's on there, double check it and move on. So if it saves time for your editor, it's going to save you money in your pocket. Now, if you don't hire a freelance editor and you just take your manuscript and you send it off to an editor or an agent for consideration, employing these things is going to help keep you organized, which is going to keep your manuscript organized. And that will show in the final product that you present for consideration. And anybody that takes a look at your work is going to know and respect that you have put in good quality work and have produced something that is going to make them more happy to consider your work, because they can see the professionalism that you've put into it. So that is the material that I have for today. And I'm wondering what anybody might have for questions. We have 10 minutes left for questions, and I'm more than happy to answer. I know it's kind of a lot of material, and yes, I will share both the Story Bible template and the style sheet template in Writers Chat members on Facebook.
So put your questions in the chat if you want to, or come on and ask. But I have two comments. Is that I think, and you kind of said it right at the tail end there, I think, wow, if you would follow this, that consistency would really add a level of professionalism and make us pros. We are writers. We should be doing this, and that Story Bible, I have never in my entire life thought of all those details. You can tell I'm not a fiction writer. But wow, Johnny, I think maybe you might want to add something about, you were talking about the sense, how that adds to place, and probably it adds that. And I think I just was amazed at that, the detail of that.
There was a lot of things in there that she said that just made me think about sense of place, which is so important. And even if you're not writing fantasy science fiction, but just writing a contemporary or historical, especially historical novel, because they don't have access to, people in historical times did not have the access to foods. Like we go to a grocery store and we get oranges year round or whatever. That's not always the case, so if you're writing, you need to be aware, if you want to deepen your sense of place, which really can then just deepen the story, add authenticity, put the reader right there. You need to be thinking about growing seasons and climate and weather, and even how geography or topography affects a person's sense of themselves. Because if you grew up in the mountains and you moved to the desert, you might feel very ill at ease at how much space there is.
Yeah.
You're no longer closed in, right? But if you do the opposite, you might feel very claustrophobic being in the mountains if you grew up, and these are extreme examples. But, like I grew up on a farm, and when I go to big cities, I feel very claustrophobic because I feel like I'm in this canyon of buildings, and I don't like it. I mean, it affects me deep inside. So, just be thinking about those things as you're writing your story, You know, again, it can just be a simple contemporary romance, but if you can just add that sense of place by thinking about food, thinking about weather, thinking about growing seasons and all this kind of thing, you are deepening your sense of place and adding more to your story.
I think it would add show, not tell,
Yeah.
too. It's a lot of sensory
Yeah,
details
it's
in
very
there.
subtle. I mean, you don't want to like necessarily draw attention. You're not going to say, you know, this is my sense of place. But, you know, and then think though how there are those stories, especially in mysteries and thrillers. Think of Wuthering Heights. I mean, could it have been set any place other than the moors of England? Really? No. You know, because it's the weather and that landscape is so much a part of that, the wildness of that story and those characters. So
Yeah, and I think you said it almost becomes a character on its own.
yes,
It
absolutely.
really does
It
on
does.
that when and add it. And I think where it might lead you to other stories or a different. I think you mentioned that, Brandy, like a plot. What do they call it? A new plot twist. The plot twist idea for you, and you know that you may not have thought about because you've added all those
Yeah.
details. You know,
Absolutely. If
on
I
that.
was writing fantasy, I would go through this list that Brandy presented, because there were things on there I would not have thought of, and I would think you'd have to do it before you wrote much of your story. I think, you know, you really want to get some of these things ironed out at
Yeah.
the time.
On that. Did you see the Scrivener question there, Brandy? Up
I
above.
did not.
Where would you put style sheet and Scrivener?
Okay. So in Scrivener, there's folders and then there's files under the folders. You can make your folders your topic headings, and then your files, you can just put in the different things like you can put a file as recreation entertainment, and then you can put a document that's modes of relaxation. And then you put another document, places of entertainment. You just do it like that.
That's great. Wow. And stuff. Well, I think, you know, like in Isabel was saying about she flashcards for places and culture. I thought it was interesting because Johnny asked, they referred to the French way of writing dates. And, you know, we forget that's very European to put the date first, then the month, and then the year. And Isabel broadened our horizon by sharing that. Really did, you know, and that's true.
Yep. Sometimes I like that version because there's less commas. Yeah.
Johnny, we
and
can't hear
also,
you. Johnny, we can't hear you.
I'm muted. She brought up italicized words too. And
yes, I was just going to comment on that.
Yeah, what I was told was that the first time you use a foreign word, you should italicize it, but then you don't have to after that. So that's what, I don't know whether that's Chicago manual style, but that's what my traditional publishers do.
Yeah, no, that's important to note too, that you might have the Chicago manual style and the AP style, but each publication is going to have their own in-house style that may slightly different from those, and they will adjust a manuscript to fit those, so you don't need to worry about that. You just want to be consistent with your own work, and that's what the style sheet and the story bio really help you to do.
And then I'm a short writer, so a lot of times I'll just do an article or a devotion, but I could see how this could provide consistency to a whole book, especially as long as fiction is, you know.
Yes.
You could be dealing 60, 80, 100,000 words, and wow.
Yep.
Anchors it, doesn't it? It anchors it.
Now, you're not necessarily going to use either of these for a very small article or a story, but anything that's more than a couple pages, you definitely can use the style sheet on still, because every document has its own style. But something that's 4, 5, 6, 7 and bigger, yeah, you're going to use these more frequently because there's just too much stuff to keep all in your head.
Right. It is.
Yeah.
Right. And that would.
Does anybody have any more questions before we come to a close?
And you want to tell us again about next week too, Brandy, while we're still in the recording?
Yep. Next week we have a Come Write With Us workshop session. It is Writing to a Publishing Schedule Holiday Edition. So we will gather next week and we'll discuss publishing schedules, and we'll do a couple of writing exercises with the publishing schedule in mind.
Very good. That's exciting. That's exciting. I know a lot of the members have talked about how much they enjoyed their Come Write With Us session. So I'm looking forward to, because I was off a lot last year with my other job. And then, so I haven't participated with one of those lately. So I'm excited.
Word of warning, we won't be writing Christmas prompts.
Ah, that'll get us in the mood. Get us in the mood to do that. Well, I want to thank everybody for joining today. Special thank you for Brandy for sharing such a, it just blew my mind. That story Bible especially just blew my mind. So hopefully that helped others. And thank you for sharing that in the group with us too, because I think that'll be well worthwhile for everybody. And so thank you for being with us today. We'll see you guys next week on Writers Chat. Bye, everybody.